Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It was upon one of those bitterly cold evenings in the winter of '95 that I found myself seated before the hearth at 221B Baker Street, engaged in the pleasurable idleness of a rare quiet night. The wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling against the window panes, while the gas lamps outside flickered unsteadily against the encroaching darkness. Holmes, ever a creature of restless intellect, was sprawled upon the settee, his long fingers steepled together, his keen eyes fixed upon the ceiling in that peculiar state of deep contemplation which I had come to associate with the lull before some intriguing case. For my own part, I had resigned myself to an evening of peace, content to peruse the latest medical journal that lay open upon my knee. Mycroft had sent word earlier in the day that affairs of state were proceeding without incident, and the criminal element in London seemed, for the moment, to be at an uncharacteristic standstill. Even Lestrade, that diligent but often beleaguered inspector of Scotland Yard, had not sought Holmes's counsel in several weeks. It was, in all respects, an evening of rare quietude, but such tranquillity, I had long since learned, was never destined to last in the presence of Sherlock Holmes. At precisely 9:30, our doorbell rang, its shrill chime cutting through the stillness of the evening. Holmes did not move at once, but I noted the slight flicker of interest in his sharp features. "Let us see, Watson," he murmured, "whether fate has once again deemed our solitude an unworthy thing." A moment later, Mrs. Hudson's voice echoed from the hall, her tone touched with uncharacteristic urgency. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. He says it is a matter of life and death." The man who entered was of distinguished bearing, though his haggard countenance and the nervous manner in which he clutched at his coat betrayed an agitation that no trained diplomat could conceal. His eyes darted about the room as though expecting some unseen menace to emerge from the shadows, and his breath was unsteady as he removed his gloves with trembling fingers. Holmes, in his usual incisive manner, had taken his measure before the man had even spoken a word. "Sir Edmund Ashford," he said coolly, motioning towards the visitor's signet ring, which bore the insignia of the Foreign Office. "British envoy to Moscow, recently returned. You have had a harrowing journey, no doubt, though I suspect it is not the rigours of travel that have driven you to my doorstep at this hour." The man's reaction was immediate. "Good heavens, Mr. Holmes!" he exclaimed, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "It is true, then, what they say of you. I had scarcely entered the room, and already you have divined my identity." Holmes waved aside the cutlement with an air of impatience. "Your business, Sir Edmund." Ashford drew a ragged breath and took the seat Holmes indicated. "I am being hunted, Mr. Holmes. I have no doubt of it. An attempt was made upon my life in Moscow, and I fear I may not survive the next. I have fled here to London, but the danger follows close behind me." Holmes regarded him with interest, but it was I who spoke first. "And what proof do you have of this?" Ashford leaned forward, his fingers tightening upon the arm of his chair. "This, Doctor Watson," he whispered, withdrawing a folded slip of paper from his coat. "This was left beneath my door the night before I was poisoned." Holmes took the paper with delicate precision, unfolding it carefully as his eyes skimmed its contents. It was a brief but chilling message, scrawled in thick, almost crude Cyrillic script. The sins of the past must be paid in blood. The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of those words settled upon us. Even I, who had seen no shortage of grim affairs alongside Holmes, felt an involuntary shiver at the note's ominous finality. Holmes turned the paper over in his fingers, holding it up to the gaslight. "Russian ink," he murmured. "An unusual blend, not commonly found outside of St. Petersburg. The hand is unpracticed, perhaps that of someone unaccustomed to writing in haste." He sniffed the parchment lightly before pressing it flat against the table. And fresh, no more than a few days old. The message was intended to be read, not merely to threaten. It is a warning, not a boast. Sir Edmund nodded gravely. "I believe they wished to see me dead for something I did long ago. I was stationed in Moscow years before my latest post. There are matters of state I cannot speak of, even now. But suffice it to say, I made powerful enemies in my service to the Crown." Holmes's expression did not change, though I knew he was weighing Ashford's words with his usual precision. "The attempt upon your life. Describe it." Ashford hesitated for only a moment before he spoke. "A meal prepared for me at the embassy, a wine offered in good company. It was only through sheer fortune that I recognized the taste. Bitter almonds, unmistakable." "Cyanide," I exhaled sharply. "A crude but effective method. And yet you survived." "A physician was among my dinner companions. He acted swiftly." Ashford passed a hand over his forehead. "But I fear my pursuers are not so easily deterred." At that moment, the diplomat swayed suddenly in his seat, his face paling. I leapt forward, catching him as his body convulsed in a shudder of pain. "Holmes!" I cried. "He's been poisoned again!" Holmes sprang to his feet, his eyes flashing with urgency. "Quickly, Watson, do what you can for him. I will examine his belongings. The devil we seek may be closer than we thought." Sir Edmund Ashford sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers tightening around the arms of his chair. His face, though pale with exhaustion, bore the unmistakable weight of one who has narrowly escaped death. Holmes, seated opposite him, regarded him with keen intensity, his steepled fingers pressed lightly against his lips. "The attempt upon your life," Holmes prompted. "Describe it in detail." Sir Edmund exhaled slowly. "It occurred at the British Embassy in Moscow during a diplomatic gathering. I had scarcely touched my wine when I detected a bitterness upon my tongue. At first I dismissed it, an overactive imagination perhaps, but then a sudden dizziness overtook me, and a chill ran through my limbs. I knew at once that I had been poisoned." Watson leaned forward. "You were fortunate to have recognized the taste. Few do." "Fortunate indeed," Ashford agreed grimly. "A physician was among the guests, and he acted swiftly, inducing vomiting and administering an antidote before the poison could fully take hold. Even so, I was confined to my chambers for days, unable to move without assistance." Holmes's fingers twitched slightly, a sign of his mind working at great speed. "And the wine, who poured it?" "A Russian attendant, a man I had never seen before. He vanished that very night." Holmes nodded. "The hand of a professional, no doubt." He tapped the arm of his chair lightly. "And the note, left beneath your door the night before, suggests this was no crime of opportunity. This was premeditated." Sir Edmund swallowed. "Yes, and I fear they will not stop until I am dead." Holmes's grey eyes gleamed with something akin to excitement. "Then, Sir Edmund, it seems we have a most pressing puzzle before us." Holmes leaned forward. "You say this vendetta stems from your past. Be precise, Sir Edmund. What did you do to incur such relentless pursuit?" The diplomat hesitated, his gaze flickering toward me before settling upon Holmes. He swallowed hard. "There are matters of state I cannot fully disclose, even now. But suffice it to say, my time in Moscow was not solely diplomatic. He hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "I was involved in certain intelligence operations during the Crimean War." I glanced at Holmes, whose expression remained unreadable. "Espionage?" Holmes suggested mildly. Sir Edmund did not confirm it outright, but his silence was answer enough. There were actions taken, necessary actions, in service to the Crown. His voice was quieter now, edged with something almost like regret. But there were those who suffered because of them. It appears that time has not dulled their appetite for retribution. Holmes studied him for a moment, then nodded. The sins of the past, indeed. And now, the reckoning. A chill ran through me. There was something in Sir Edmund's manner that spoke not only of fear, but of guilt. Sir Edmund opened his mouth to speak further, but the words never came. Instead, his breath hitched suddenly, his body convulsing with a violent tremor. His fingers clutched at his throat, his eyes widening in panic. "Watson!" Holmes's voice was sharp, urgent. "He's been poisoned again!" I sprang from my chair, catching Sir Edmund as he sagged forward. His pulse was erratic beneath my fingers, his skin already growing clammy. Instinct took over. I loosened his collar, checking his pupils. His breath was coming in shallow, laboured gasps. "Stay with me, man," I urged, reaching for my medical bag. "Tell me what you've ingested." But Sir Edmund could do no more than gasp. His body trembled violently, then slumped against me. Holmes, ever swift, was already at his side, scanning the table, the chair, the very air itself. "There." He pointed to Sir Edmund's cuff, where a faint sheen of moisture glistened. He raised it to his nose. "A contact poison, likely absorbed through the skin." My blood ran cold. "Then we must act quickly, or he will not live through the hour." Holmes's jaw tightened. "Then waste no time, Watson. Do what you must." And with that, I turned all my focus to saving the life of the doomed diplomat. I have seen many men in the throes of death, but seldom have I acted with such urgency as I did that night in Baker Street. Sir Edmund Ashford lay slumped against the arm of his chair, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His skin, pale and clammy, was already betraying the effects of the poison. My hands, trained by war and necessity, moved swiftly, my mind racing to identify the substance. "Holmes, fetch my bag," I commanded, loosening the diplomat's collar and tilting his head back. Holmes, uncharacteristically swift in response, had already anticipated my need. Within seconds I had drawn a small vial from my medical kit, pressing a few drops between Ashford's lips. His throat convulsed as he swallowed reflexively. "His pulse?" Holmes asked sharply. "Weak, but present," I replied, pressing my fingers against the clammy skin of Ashford's wrist. "The symptoms suggest a contact poison, absorbed through the skin." My eyes flickered to his cuffs. "It was recent. We may still counteract its effects." Holmes nodded, his gaze already scanning the room. "Whoever administered this poison did so with remarkable subtlety. There is no glass, no food, no open wound. Only the note remains." His voice trailed off, and I saw his keen eyes alight with realization. Even as I worked to stabilize our unfortunate visitor, I could see Holmes's mind moving, constructing theories, eliminating impossibilities. And as I applied the antidote, waiting for the first flicker of consciousness to return to Sir Edmund's features, I knew with certainty this was only the beginning. While I remained at Ashford's side, monitoring his shallow but steady breathing, Holmes had turned his attention to the note. He held it delicately between his fingers, as one might a venomous snake, dangerous but fascinating. "The ink," he murmured, holding the paper up to the gaslight. "Russian in origin, though not of common variety. Observe, Watson, the shade is thicker than our domestic blends, the texture uneven, suggesting it was mixed by hand rather than factory produced." I frowned. "That proves little. Any man could have obtained such ink." Holmes smiled faintly. "True, but the method of writing is just as telling. Note the strokes. Hurried, yet deliberate. The hand that penned this was accustomed to writing in Russian, but forced to do so in haste. This suggests urgency, but not carelessness. And what does that tell you? That the writer wished to ensure his message was received, but had no time to linger. More intriguingly, he was likely not the assassin himself. A groan from the chair interrupted us. Sir Edmund stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open. His gaze, though still unfocused, darted between us in alarm. "You are safe," I assured him. "The poison was not fatal, at least not in the dose you received." Holmes leaned forward. "Sir Edmund, think carefully. Have you handled anything, touched anything since arriving here?" Ashford's forehead creased as he tried to recall. My coat, my gloves, and the note." His face blanched further. "The note, Holmes. It was the note." Holmes exhaled. "As I suspected, the ink was not merely Russian in origin. It was laced with poison." Holmes wasted no time. The moment Sir Edmund was stable enough to sit upright, he turned to the writing desk, pulled forth a fresh sheet of paper, and began composing a message with swift precision. "Mycroft must be informed," he said, his pen scratching against the parchment. "This affair is no common vendetta, Watson. It has the markings of something far deeper." I glanced at Ashford, who now watched Holmes with growing apprehension. "Deeper," he echoed. Holmes did not pause in his writing. "You are not the first, Sir Edmund. 3 other British officials in Moscow have died under similar circumstances in the past year. Mysterious illnesses, unexplained disappearances. Mycroft monitors such things." Sir Edmund stiffened. "Then this is not personal." "Oh, it is very personal," Holmes countered, sealing the letter with a precise fold. "Just not merely personal to you. This is systematic, methodical. You have survived where others have perished, and that makes you dangerous to whoever orchestrates this affair." I took the letter from Holmes and rang for Mrs. Hudson, instructing her to have it delivered at once. "You believe Mycroft will have answers?" I asked. "I believe Mycroft already knows more than he should," Holmes replied. "The question is, will he share it with us?" Sir Edmund exhaled slowly. "And if he does not?" Holmes smiled. "Then we shall have no choice but to seek the truth ourselves." Holmes's letter to Mycroft was dispatched without delay, and within the hour a response was delivered. Mycroft, ever concise, had penned but a single line. "Your concerns are justified. 3 dead. The pattern is undeniable. Proceed with caution." Holmes read the message twice, his expression impassive. Then, folding the paper, he turned to Sir Edmund. "It appears, my dear sir, that you are not alone in your predicament. 3 other British officials have perished in Moscow under unexplained circumstances. Each case, I suspect, shares a common thread with your own. Sir Edmund's breath caught. Good Lord, then it is an orchestrated effort. Holmes inclined his head. Assassinations carried out with precision. The method differs, but the objective remains constant, silencing men tied to British intelligence. His fingers drummed upon the table. And yet, you survived. That is of interest. I interjected. You think the same hand is behind all of this? Undoubtedly. But the question remains, who stands to gain from these deaths? Holmes rose, his decision made. The answer, I fear, lies not in London, but in Moscow. Sir Edmund's pallor deepened. Then you mean to go there? Holmes smiled faintly. The game is afoot, Watson. Pack your bags. It was not the first time I had accompanied Holmes into peril. But as our train pulled from Victoria Station, bound for the continent, I could not shake a deep foreboding. Moscow was no ordinary city. It was a place where allegiances were fleeting, where secrets were currency, and where men disappeared without a trace. Holmes, ever the master of disguise, had prepared our identities with meticulous care. I was to assume the role of doctor. James Forsyth, a Scottish historian with an interest in Slavic literature, while Holmes became Monsieur Antoine Dupuis, a French scholar of antiquities. His mastery of languages ensured our cover would hold under scrutiny. As we crossed into the frozen lands of the Russian Empire, Holmes spoke little, his mind evidently occupied with the case. Only once did he break his silence. Watson, tell me, what do you make of our adversary? I considered. A cunning foe, ruthless, yet patient. They do not strike indiscriminately, but with purpose. Holmes nodded approvingly. Indeed, we are not dealing with common criminals, but with an organization, one that operates in the shadows and has evaded detection for years. Such a force will not welcome our interference. I tighten my coat against the cold, and yet we go willingly into their den. Holmes's smile was razor-thin. Where else, my dear Watson, would we find the spider but at the heart of its web? Moscow greeted us with an icy indifference, its streets veiled in mist, its air thick with the scent of coal and secrecy. It was a city that trusted no man, and where a wrong glance could mean the difference between life and death. At the station, we were met by Inspector Alexei Petrov, a stout, hard-eyed man whose uniform bore the insignia of the Moscow police. He eyed us with suspicion before speaking in heavily accented English. Monsieur Dupuis, Dr. Forsyth, you are expected. Holmes, unfazed, gave a curt nod. Then let us not delay, Inspector. Petrov led us through the labyrinthine streets, speaking in hushed tones. You do not know what you have walked into, Englishmen. Moscow is not London. Here, men vanish, and no one asks why. And yet you remain, Holmes observed. Petrov snorted. Some of us must, but do not expect allies. The Black Dagger's reach is long, and their informants are everywhere. I stiffened. The Black Dagger? A name whispered in fear, Petrov said. An assassin's guild older than your empire. If they have marked Sir Edmund for death, then not even your famous detective may stop them. Holmes's eyes gleamed with intrigue. That, Inspector, remains to be seen. The late hour found us standing before a grand but desolate mansion on the outskirts of Moscow, its darkened windows staring blankly into the night. This had been Sir Edmund's last residence before his hurried departure, and it was here that Holmes hoped to unearth the spectres of his past. Inspector Petrov produced a heavy key, its edges worn with time. The embassy left this in my care, he muttered, fitting it into the lock. The house has been undisturbed since Sir Edmund fled. Holmes gave a small smile. I rather think, Inspector, that we shall soon prove otherwise. We stepped inside, the air within heavy with dust and disuse. Holmes moved with purpose through the dimly lit corridors, his eyes missing nothing. He paused at the threshold of the study, his gaze sharpening. A curious thing, Watson. The dust on this door is undisturbed, yet the hinges have seen recent use. Petrov frowned. You mean someone has been here? Holmes did not reply immediately. Instead, he crossed to the bookshelves lining the far wall and ran his fingers along the spines. Then, with a sudden motion, he pressed upon a particular volume, and a faint click echoed through the room. I watched in astonishment as a narrow panel slid open within the bookshelf, revealing a hidden compartment. Holmes withdrew a bundle of papers, his expression unreadable. Well, well, Watson, he murmured. It would seem Sir Edmund was keeping secrets of his own. Holmes unfolded the papers with care, his sharp gaze scanning the contents. A list of names, he mused, his finger trailing over the parchment. English, Russian, and here, some already struck through. I leaned closer, my stomach tightening. The deceased. Holmes nodded. It would appear so. These are not mere acquaintances, Watson. These men share a singular distinction. They are all connected to British intelligence. Petrov inhaled sharply. Then this is proof of the assassin's work. Holmes was silent for a moment. Then, reaching into the compartment, he retrieved a small object, a coin, dull with age, yet unmistakable in its design. At its centre, a dagger was etched in relief, its blade curved like the fang of a serpent. The black dagger, murmured Petrov, his voice grave. Holmes turned the coin over in his fingers. An old order, but one not yet extinct. This, Watson, is our adversary. I shuddered at the thought. In that moment, it became clear that we were no longer merely investigating a mystery. We were now standing in the sights of an unseen and deadly enemy. Holmes stood before the hidden compartment, the list of names still in his hand, his expression one of deep contemplation. Sir Edmund, now somewhat recovered, regarded him warily. You know more than you have admitted, Holmes said at last, his voice quiet but unyielding. This is not a simple diplomatic affair, Sir Edmund. You were never merely an envoy, were you? A shadow passed across the diplomat's face. I do not know what you mean. Holmes tapped the list. These men, spies, operatives, informants, and your name among them. The attempt on your life was not the first, nor will it be the last. This is retribution for something that occurred long ago. Sir Edmund exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. It was the war, he murmured. The Crimean War. I was young, ambitious. There were orders, things that had to be done. He hesitated. There was an operation, a network of Russian agents within our ranks, exposed and eliminated. It was my work. Holmes nodded. And now, those who survived have not forgotten. Sir Edmund's hands clenched into fists. I never imagined it would follow me after all these years. Holmes met his gaze. Vengeance does not keep to a schedule, Sir Edmund. The Black Dagger is patient. And now, they mean to finish what they began. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears. Then Holmes turned sharply to me. Come, Watson. There is a man in Moscow who may know more than he should. And with that, we set out to seek a ghost from Sir Edmund's past. The man Holmes sought was Victor Mikhailov, a name unfamiliar to me, but one that had evidently been etched in Holmes's memory. Petrov led us through a warren of back streets, where the fog clung to the alleys like a living thing. "Your man is cautious," Petrov muttered as we reached a dimly lit tavern, and with good reason. We found Mikhailov in a shadowed corner, his frame hunched, his eyes darting about the room as though expecting death at any moment. He started when Holmes took the seat opposite him. "You should not have come," Mikhailov whispered. Holmes ignored the warning. "The Black Dagger," he said evenly. "They hunt Sir Edmund Ashford." Mikhailov's fingers twitched. "Then he is already dead." "Not yet," I interjected. "But he will be if we do not stop them." The informant exhaled, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You do not understand. This is not a gang of killers. It is a vow, an oath of blood. The Black Dagger does not kill for money or pleasure. They avenge." Holmes leaned in. "And what do they seek to avenge?" Mikhailov swallowed hard. "A betrayal. The British uncovered a Russian network during the war. Exposed. Executed. Ashford was the man who orchestrated it." He shook his head. "The Black Dagger was born that day." Petrov tensed. "Then this is not about one man." Mikhailov's haunted gaze met Holmes's. "Number, it is about an oath that will not be broken until the last of those responsible is dead." A chill ran through me as I realized Sir Edmund was merely one name on a list, and the Black Dagger would not stop until every name was crossed out. As we stepped back into the cold Moscow air, Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt piecing together the threads of this grim puzzle. Petrov walked beside us, his jaw tight with restrained anger. "This changes everything," he muttered. "If Mikhailov is right, this is not a crime, it is a purge." Holmes stopped abruptly. "How many British agents have been stationed in Moscow over the years?" Petrov frowned. "Several. Some remain. Others—" His voice trailed off. Holmes turned to face him fully. "And of those who left, how many have died under suspicious circumstances?" The inspector hesitated before answering. "Two. One fell from a window, ruled an accident. The other—" Holmes lifted a hand. "Not an accident, the other inspector?" Petrov exhaled. "Colonel Henry Graves, found strangled in his apartment 2 days ago." A heavy silence followed. "Another name on the list," I murmured. Holmes nodded. "And another that will follow if we do not act." Petrov's expression darkened. "Then we must find them before they find us." Holmes gave a small, grim smile. "Precisely." It was nearing midnight when Holmes and I found ourselves standing before an unassuming cellar door in one of Moscow's less reputable districts. The stench of damp stone and stale spirits clung to the air as we stepped inside. Holmes had transformed himself into Antoine Dupuis, a French merchant with an interest in rare antiquities. His accent was impeccable, his mannerisms entirely convincing. I, on the other hand, was his taciturn associate, content to let Holmes do the talking. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with suspicion. Around us, men huddled in groups, speaking in hushed Russian. Some bore the hardened expressions of criminals, others the quiet wariness of men who had seen too much. A few cast curious glances in our direction, but most ignored us. A thick-set man with a scarred cheek approached. "You seek business?" he asked in Russian. Holmes inclined his head. "I seek information." The man's expression darkened. "This is not a place for questions." Holmes produced a few rubles and slid them across the table. "Even for a generous price." The man hesitated, then leaned in. "There is talk of an Englishman being hunted. The Black Dagger does not forgive." Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. "And where does one find such men?" The man's lips thinned. "One does not find them. They find you." A chill ran down my spine. Holmes merely smiled. Then I shall wait. It was not long before our patience was rewarded. A figure materialized from the shadows, his face concealed beneath a dark mask. The room seemed to hush as he approached, his movements fluid, deliberate. "Antoine Dupuis," he murmured in flawless French. "You ask dangerous questions." Holmes, unfazed, met the man's gaze. "I seek knowledge. That is all." A low chuckle. "Knowledge is costly, and in Moscow, it can cost one's life." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "Then I presume I have attracted attention." The masked man leaned closer. "Leave, by midnight, or you will not see the sunrise." There was no mistaking the finality of his tone. Around us, the patrons of the den continued their whispered dealings, seemingly indifferent to the exchange. But I saw how a few pairs of eyes flickered toward us, watching, waiting. Holmes remained perfectly still, studying the man before him. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, he murmured, "A most generous warning." The man stepped back into the shadows, vanishing as swiftly as he had come. Holmes turned to me with a gleam in his eye. "Well, Watson, it appears we have been formally introduced." My hands clenched into fists. "Holmes, we must leave." He smiled. "On the contrary, now I am certain we must stay." I had seen Holmes court danger before, but never had I felt such a deep unease as I did that night. The very air of Moscow seemed hostile, as though the city itself conspired to swallow us whole. As we stepped into the streets, I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder at every turn. "Holmes," I muttered, "this is madness. We have been warned." Holmes strolled beside me, hands in his pockets, seemingly indifferent. "Warnings, my dear Watson, are but the polite prelude to action. I find them most instructive." I exhaled sharply. This is no ordinary adversary. The Black Dagger is an institution, not a common gang. If they wish us dead, they will not hesitate. Holmes stopped abruptly and turned to me. "Precisely why we must force their hand. They are watching us, Watson, waiting to see whether we are cowed." His voice was calm, measured. "If we leave, we confirm their power. If we stay, we force them to reveal themselves." I looked into his eyes, saw the unshakable resolve within them, and knew there would be no dissuading him. "At least," I sighed, "let us take precautions." Holmes smiled. "Of course, I shall rely on your good sense, as always." But even as we resumed our walk, I could not shake the feeling that we had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Holmes was in high spirits as we returned to our lodgings, seemingly untroubled by the events of the evening. He whistled a soft tune under his breath, pausing only to glance occasionally over his shoulder. I knew better than to assume this was done idly. "They are watching us, Watson," he said at last. "The Black Dagger is nothing if not methodical. Their assassins do not act without certainty." I frowned. "And yet they warned us." Holmes smiled. "Yes, and now we must give them a reason to act." I started. "You mean to lure them into attacking?" "Precisely," he replied. "A predator is never more vulnerable than when it believes it has cornered its prey." I knew better than to argue, though my unease grew with every moment. Holmes sent word to Inspector Petrov, instructing him to spread a rumour that Sir Edmund, now fully recovered, was being moved to a safe house under heavy guard. In truth, Sir Edmund would remain hidden while we would occupy the supposed location ourselves. "The Black Dagger must be certain before they strike," Holmes explained. "If they act upon our falsehood, we shall have confirmed their hand." I exhaled slowly. "And if they do not?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then, my dear Watson, we shall know we are dealing with a more patient adversary than I anticipated." We retired for the evening, though I found little rest. Holmes sat by the window, smoking his pipe, his gaze fixed upon the darkened street below. And as the hours passed, I could not help but feel that we had set ourselves upon a path from which there could be no retreat. I had drifted into a fitful slumber when a sudden noise, soft, almost imperceptible, stirred me. My eyes snapped open. Across the room, Holmes sat motionless in his chair, his pipe extinguished. A faint creak. A shadow moved against the wall. Holmes's hand twitched toward his revolver. Then, in an instant, the silence shattered. A dark figure lunged from the shadows, a curved dagger flashing in the dim light. Holmes twisted aside, the blade missing him by mere inches. I sprang from the bed, my own pistol drawn, but the intruder was unnaturally swift, darting toward the window in an attempt to escape. Holmes, recovering with remarkable speed, seized a nearby chair and sent it crashing into the assassin's path. The figure stumbled, and for the first time, I caught a clear glimpse of him. A lean, wiry man clad in black, his face partially obscured by a cloth mask. His eyes, sharp and cold, burned with unmistakable intent. Holmes moved swiftly, striking at the man's wrist with a precise blow, forcing the dagger from his grip. The weapon clattered to the floor, and I stepped forward, levelling my revolver at his chest. "Do not move," I warned. The assassin froze, his breath ragged. Holmes bent down, retrieving the dagger. He examined it briefly before nodding to himself. "Poisoned," he murmured. "As expected." Petrov burst into the room moments later, summoned by the commotion. His eyes widened at the sight before him. "You have one of them?" Holmes smiled coldly. "Indeed, and I rather think he will have quite a story to tell." The captured assassin sat before us, bound securely to a chair, his face an impassive mask. Despite Petrov's repeated questioning, he had remained resolutely silent, his gaze fixed upon Holmes with a quiet, knowing confidence. It was a look I had seen before, the certainty of a man who believes his cause is beyond betrayal. Holmes studied him for a long moment before turning away with a sigh. "There is little use in persuasion, Inspector. This man will not speak." Petrov's lips tightened. "Then what do you propose?" Holmes took a seat, steepling his fingers. "It is elementary. We must anticipate his master's next move." I frowned. "Surely, having failed tonight, they will retreat into the shadows." Holmes smiled faintly. "On the contrary, Watson, their failure only accelerates their plans. Sir Edmund lives, and as long as he breathes, he remains a threat to those who seek his death. They cannot afford another delay." His fingers drummed lightly upon the table. "Number, they will strike again, and soon." Petrov leaned forward. "Then we set a trap." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, but one of their own making. If we cannot force them into the light, then we must give them cause to reveal themselves." I did not yet grasp his meaning, but I had long since learned to trust in Holmes's foresight. There was little doubt in my mind that he had already devised a means of turning the assassin's own ruthlessness against them. Holmes rose and turned toward Petrov. "You must circulate a report at once. Let it be known that Sir Edmund has made a miraculous recovery and is to be moved to the British Embassy under heavy escort." Petrov's brows lifted. "A public announcement?" "A private one," Holmes corrected. "Discretion is the key. Let it pass through your men in whispers, just enough for eager ears to overhear. Let the Black Dagger believe they still have time." I exhaled slowly, beginning to understand. "And they will move to finish the job." Holmes inclined his head. "Precisely." Petrov's expression darkened. "And when they come?" Holmes smiled. "We shall be waiting." Despite my admiration for Holmes's brilliance, I could not quell the unease growing within me. The Black Dagger was no ordinary foe. They had waited years to exact their vengeance, and their reach extended farther than we could possibly know. If our ruse failed, it would not be Sir Edmund who paid the price, but us. Holmes seemed to sense my apprehension, for he turned to me with his characteristic coolness. "Courage, Watson. The path is perilous, but the only way forward is through." I nodded, though in my heart I could not shake the feeling that we were stepping into the jaws of something far larger than ourselves. The following morning, the plan was set into motion. At dawn, a covered carriage arrived at our lodgings under the watchful eye of Petrov's men. 2 figures, cloaked in heavy coats, were helped inside. One bearing an undeniable resemblance to Sir Edmund. In truth, Sir Edmund remained hidden within a secure location. The figure in the carriage was a carefully disguised decoy, dressed in his clothing and flanked by armed guards. The route to the embassy had been deliberately chosen for its vulnerability. Narrow streets, sharp corners, places where an ambush would be most easily staged. Holmes and I rode in a second carriage, several lengths behind, watching from a distance. His gaze was sharp, his every movement brimming with anticipation. "They will not strike immediately," he murmured. "They will wait until they are certain." I tightened my grip on my revolver. "And if they do not act?" Holmes gave a small smile. "Then I have misjudged them, and we shall return to our lodgings in peace." He glanced toward the decoy carriage ahead. "But I rather think, Watson, that we shall not be so fortunate." I followed his gaze, my pulse quickening. The carriage had reached a particularly deserted stretch of road, its wheels clattering over the uneven cobblestones. Then, as if conjured from the very mist itself, a dark figure stepped into its path. Holmes exhaled. And so the play begins. The moment the carriage slowed before the lone figure in the road, the trap was sprung. A sharp whistle cut through the air, an unmistakable signal. In an instant, dark shapes emerged from the shadows, converging on the vehicle like wolves upon their prey. Holmes leaned forward beside me, his gaze locked upon the unfolding scene. "There," he murmured, his voice edged with satisfaction. "The commander of this ambush." I followed his line of sight. Among the attackers, one man did not move with the urgency of a mere assassin. He stood at a distance, observing with calculating detachment. Then, as if sensing Holmes's scrutiny, he stepped forward, his face briefly illuminated by a passing lantern. Even I, who had no familiarity with Russian diplomats, recognized him at once. "Korsakov," I breathed. Holmes nodded. "Ambassador Ivan Korsakov, the architect of Sir Edmund's doom." His fingers curled into the fabric of his coat. "And now, my dear Watson, we must see that he does not escape." A single gunshot rang out from the decoy carriage, Petrov's men signalling their resistance. The assassins faltered. Korsakov's calm demeanour broke. He turned sharply and barked an order before vanishing into the warren of alleyways beyond. Holmes sprang from the carriage. "After him, Watson! He will not elude us now!" We pursued him through the twisting labyrinth of Moscow's streets, our breath curling in the frigid air. Korsakov moved with the speed of a man well acquainted with flight, weaving through alleyways, vaulting low barriers, slipping into the shadows at every opportunity. Petrov and his men fanned out, attempting to cut off his escape, but he knew the city better than we did. At every turn, he seemed to anticipate his pursuers, vanishing moments before we reached him. Holmes, undeterred, pressed on relentlessly. "He has an extraction point," he called over his shoulder. "They do not run without a plan." I struggled to keep pace. "Then where is he going?" Holmes's eyes flashed with realization. The cathedral! I did not understand his reasoning, but I did not question it. We altered course, racing toward the grand cathedral at the city's centre. The streets grew narrower, the buildings pressing in upon us like silent sentinels. As we rounded the final corner, we saw him. Korsakov had reached the cathedral steps, where a carriage awaited, a means of escape, no doubt prearranged. Holmes did not slow. With startling speed, he launched himself forward, seizing Korsakov by the collar and dragging him back just as he reached the carriage door. Korsakov struggled violently, but Holmes held fast. "You are beaten, Ambassador," he said coolly. "The game is over." Petrov's men surrounded them, weapons drawn. Korsakov, breathing heavily, ceased his resistance. His gaze met Holmes, dark with fury, but tinged with something else. Admiration, perhaps, for the man who had outplayed him. With quiet finality, Petrov stepped forward. "Ivan Korsakov," he declared, "you are under arrest for murder and conspiracy against the British Crown." Holmes released his grip. Korsakov straightened his coat, casting one final glance toward the carriage that might have carried him to freedom. Then, with a weary nod, he extended his wrists to Petrov's men. Holmes turned to me, a small smile playing at his lips. "And so, Watson," he said, "the hunt comes to an end." Korsakov's breath came in ragged gasps as he backed toward the grand doors of the cathedral, his hand twitching toward his coat. Holmes, ever composed, raised a single finger in warning. "A firearm, Ambassador?" "Surely not," Holmes murmured. "A man of your station resorting to such crude methods. It would be beneath you." Korsakov's lips curled into a smirk. "And yet, Mr. Holmes, you have forced my hand." Petrov and his men fanned out, their revolvers gleaming in the dim light of the cathedral. The great pillars cast long, dark shadows, and I felt an eerie stillness settle upon us, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Holmes took a slow step forward. "You are cornered, Korsakov. Your men are scattered, your escape route severed. Lay down your weapon, and we may yet find a diplomatic solution to your predicament." Korsakov laughed. A diplomat to the end, even now. His hand darted inside his coat, and every weapon in the room cocked in unison. But instead of a pistol, he withdrew a thin, leather-bound notebook. "Do you know what this is, Holmes?" Holmes tilted his head slightly. "Your final bargaining chip, I presume." Korsakov nodded. "The names of every agent, every official who played a part in the betrayal of our people. Sir Edmund is only one name among many. Even if you take me, the Black Dagger will endure." Holmes sighed. "How very dramatic. And yet, you fail to see the flaw in your reasoning." Korsakov's smirk faltered. Holmes gestured to Petrov. "That notebook has already sealed your fate, my dear Ambassador. It is no longer leverage. It is evidence." Korsakov's expression darkened as he realized his mistake. The noose had tightened, and he'd pulled it himself. Holmes stepped closer, his voice a quiet blade. "You see, Korsakov, revenge is a delicate thing. The Black Dagger was not merely exacting vengeance. It was executing a plan carefully constructed over decades. Your men believed in its purpose, in the righteousness of their cause." Korsakov's jaw tightened. "They were betrayed." Holmes nodded. "Yes, but not in the way they believe." A flicker of doubt crossed Korsakov's face. Holmes seized upon it. "Your network's fall was not merely the work of Sir Edmund," he continued. "You too played your part. You were already a man of ambition then. Did you truly think no one would discover that you, Korsakov, had fed false information to your own side?" Korsakov's silence spoke volumes. "The Black Dagger was betrayed from within. Holmes said softly, and they will learn the truth one way or another. For the first time, a shadow of real fear crossed Korsakov's face. His own organization, men he had commanded, would turn on him if they knew. Petrov stepped forward. "It is over." Korsakov swallowed hard. He looked to Holmes, as if hoping for an escape. But there was none. For a moment, it seemed as though Korsakov might surrender. His fingers curled around the notebook, his gaze darting between Holmes and Petrov. Then, with sudden fury, he lunged. Holmes sidestepped gracefully, and before I could raise my revolver, Petrov's men descended upon Korsakov, dragging him to the ground. The struggle was brief. The fight had left him the moment he had realized Holmes had unraveled his secret. Petrov straightened, his face impassive. "Ambassador Ivan Korsakov, you are under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and acts of treason." Holmes adjusted his coat. "And thus falls the last pillar of the Black Dagger." I exhaled, tension draining from my limbs. The hunt was over. The game had reached its inevitable conclusion. Holmes turned to me, a faint smile playing on his lips. "A most fascinating case, Watson." I shook my head. "A most dangerous one." Holmes merely chuckled. "As all the best ones are." Sir Edmund Ashford lay propped up against the pillows in the small, dimly lit room where he had been kept under guard. His face was gaunt, his skin still pale from the effects of the poison and the stress of the past days. Yet, as Holmes and I entered, there was something in his eyes that had not been there before, a flicker of relief, perhaps even gratitude. "You have done it, then?" His voice was hoarse, but his words were steady. Holmes inclined his head. "Korsakov is in the hands of Inspector Petrov. The Black Dagger's grip upon you has been severed." Sir Edmund exhaled deeply, as though a weight he had carried for decades had finally lifted. "I owe you my life, Mr. Holmes." Holmes waved a dismissive hand. "No, Sir Edmund. You merely retained it." I stepped forward. "You will recover. In time." Ashford's lips curled in a bitter smile. "Perhaps. But what of the others? The men who came before me? Graves, Hathaway, Spencer, those whose names were struck through before mine." Holmes's expression darkened. "For them, justice comes too late. But their deaths have at least illuminated the truth." Sir Edmund's gaze flickered toward the window, where the first light of dawn was breaking over the Moscow skyline. "Justice," he murmured, "and vengeance. Strange how thin the line between them truly is." Holmes studied him for a moment, then turned toward the door. "Come, Watson. London awaits." Our journey home was undertaken without incident, though I could not shake the feeling that Moscow had left its mark upon us both. Holmes, for his part, remained characteristically silent throughout the voyage, occupying himself with various newspapers and the occasional cigarette. He spoke little of the case, though I suspected his mind had not yet left it. It was only upon our return to Baker Street, seated once more in the familiar surroundings of our sitting room, that Holmes at last set aside his reading material and turned to me with a knowing smile. "Well, Watson," he said, stretching his long limbs before the fire, "do you not wish to hear the final piece of the puzzle?" I set down my teacup and regarded him expectantly. "You mean there is more to tell?" He chuckled. "There is always more to tell, my dear fellow. What we uncovered in Moscow was but the surface of the matter. The true nature of the vendetta against Sir Edmund runs far deeper than a simple act of revenge." I leaned forward. "Then tell me, Holmes, what did we miss?" Holmes steepled his fingers, his expression one of quiet amusement. "It is not what we missed, Watson. It is what we were never meant to see. Holmes let the moment linger before continuing. Consider, Watson. The Black Dagger is an organization built upon retribution. Their targets were carefully selected, men tied to British intelligence, all of whom played a role in dismantling a Russian espionage network decades ago. I nodded. Yes, that much is clear. Holmes's eyes gleamed. But why now? Why wait all these years to strike? I frowned. Perhaps they required time to rebuild, to locate those responsible. Holmes shook his head. No, Watson. This was no mere act of revenge. It was a warning. I stiffened. A warning? Holmes leaned forward. Sir Edmund and his peers were not executed for their past sins alone. They were eliminated because someone feared what they still knew. The truth they carried was more dangerous alive than dead. A chill ran through me. Then who orchestrated it? Korsakov. Holmes smiled thinly. Korsakov was but a pawn, Watson. The true mastermind remains in the shadows, ensuring that those who once played their game do not live long enough to expose it. I swallowed hard. Then this is not over. Holmes exhaled, reaching for his pipe. No, my dear Watson. It is merely the beginning. Holmes sat in his armchair, fingers steepled, his gaze fixed upon the flames dancing in the hearth. He had been silent for some time, lost in thought, before he finally spoke. There is something rather distinctive about an assassin's method, Watson. Like an artist, each killer leaves behind a signature, intentional or not. I nodded. You mean the poison? Precisely. Holmes leaned forward. You recall that Sir Edmund was poisoned not once, but twice. Once in Moscow, and again under our very roof. And yet, the manner of its administration was identical. A slow-acting toxin, absorbed through the skin, undetectable in its early stages, but fatal if left untreated. I shuddered. A cruel and deliberate method. Holmes nodded, but not a new one. The Black Dagger has employed this very poison for decades, dating back to the earliest known assassinations linked to their order. The formula is rare, its application precise, and its secrecy fiercely guarded. Only those within the organization would have the knowledge to use it effectively. I frowned. Then Korsakov was not merely following orders, he was part of the guild. Beyond question, Holmes replied. And yet, the presence of that note suggests an anomaly. The Black Dagger is not known for warnings. They strike without prelude, without hesitation. He tapped the armrest thoughtfully. No, Watson, someone else left that note, and I intend to discover why. Holmes retrieved the now infamous note from his desk and held it up to the firelight. The ink, still faintly visible, gleamed against the parchment. The sins of the past must be paid in blood, I murmured. A threat, surely. Holmes shook his head. A message, yes, but not from the Black Dagger. He turned the note over. Consider this, Watson. Why would an organization so meticulous in its executions provide its victims with a warning? I hesitated. To instill fear? A plausible theory, but incorrect, Holmes replied. The truth is rather more remarkable. This note was not left by the assassin, but by a man who sought to prevent the murder. I stared at him. A member of the Black Dagger. Holmes exhaled. A former member. A spy who defected long ago, yet whose conscience would not allow him to remain silent. He must have known the assassin's plans, perhaps even been one of them once, but something compelled him to act, to leave this warning for Sir Edmund. I ran a hand through my hair, and yet it was not enough to save him. Holmes set the note down with a quiet sigh. No, Watson, but perhaps it was enough to give him a chance. A long silence stretched between us. broken only by the occasional crackling of the fire. The case had reached its conclusion, and yet I found little satisfaction in the outcome. "Holmes," I said at last, "does it not strike you how little any of this mattered in the end? The war was decades ago. The men who carried out these betrayals are either dead or vanished. And yet the Black Dagger did not forget." Holmes nodded. "Memory is a dangerous thing, Watson. There are those who can bury the past, and those who become prisoners of it." I exhaled. "And what of us? We risked our lives for a man whose actions we do not fully know, whose past remains obscured in the shadows of intelligence and war." Holmes studied me with an unreadable expression. "You question whether he deserved saving?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Number. But I wonder if it ever truly ends. These men, Ashford, Graves, Korsakov, they spent their lives playing a game of deception, a game that continued long after they had left it behind." I looked into the fire. "It seems to me that the past never truly dies, Holmes. It only waits." Holmes regarded me for a long moment before responding. "Yes, Watson, and those who do not look over their shoulders often find the past catching up to them." Holmes leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the darkened window. "Justice and vengeance, my dear Watson, are but two sides of the same coin," he murmured. "The trick is knowing when one becomes the other." I considered his words in silence. The men we had pursued, the lives lost, the vendetta stretching across decades. It was impossible to say where justice had ended and vengeance had begun. The Black Dagger had sought retribution for a past wrong, much as Sir Edmund had once sought to protect his country at any cost. And in the end, both had paid their price in blood. "Do you believe Sir Edmund will ever be safe?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "Safe? Perhaps, but free? Never. Men like him carry the weight of their past with them always." He reached for his pipe, lighting it with a practiced flick of his match. "But that, Watson, is no longer our concern." I nodded, though I could not shake the unease in my chest. The case was over. And yet, I could not help but feel that its shadows would linger long after we had left it behind. The hour grew late, and the familiar fog of London curled around the windows of Baker Street. Holmes sat in his chair, pipe in hand, his gaze distant. I knew this look. His mind was already turning toward the next puzzle, the next unseen danger lurking just beyond the horizon. At last he exhaled and turned to me with a faint smile. "Tell me, Watson, how do you feel about a quiet visit to the countryside?" I groaned. "Not another case?" Holmes chuckled. "My dear fellow, when have you ever known me to refuse a mystery?" And with that, our next adventure had already begun. As the last embers of our fire flickered in the hearth, I leaned back in my chair, staring into the darkness outside. The fog of London pressed against the windows, silent and impenetrable. The case was over, and yet a weight lingered in the room, as though some part of Moscow's shadows had followed us home. Holmes, pipe in hand, exhaled a thin ribbon of smoke, his gaze distant. "A curious thing, Watson, how the past has a way of demanding its due. A debt left unpaid will always find its collector." I nodded. Korsakov and his men believed they were delivering justice, yet in the end, they became the very thing they despised. Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. The Black Dagger sought revenge for a betrayal they themselves did not fully understand. Their pursuit of justice blinded them to the simple truth. Vengeance rarely serves those who wield it." I frowned. "And what of Sir Edmund? Does he deserve peace?" Holmes tapped his pipe against the ashtray. "Deserve? Perhaps. But men like him, Watson, do not live by what they deserve. They live by what they can escape. A silence passed between us before he turned, his sharp eyes gleaming with mischief. Now tell me, Watson, what do you believe was Korsakov's greatest mistake? Holmes solved the case, but every villain makes a fatal misstep. Was it Korsakov's reliance on fear, his underestimation of Holmes, or was it something hidden in plain sight? What do you think was the assassin's biggest mistake? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, subscribe for more Sherlock Holmes adventures, and be sure to share this story with fellow mystery lovers. There's always another case waiting to be solved. Until next time, keep your wits sharp and your deductions sharper.